Hey, you there? Yes, you, watching this video right now. Have you ever stopped to think about what happens after we die? I mean, really think about it? Because let me tell you, whatever you're imagining, the reality is far more intense and consequential than you could ever believe. I'm Grace Carter, and in September 2024, I died for 9 minutes. In that time, I stood face to face with Jesus and witnessed the truth about heaven and hell. What I saw changed everything, and I'm here to tell you why the choices you're making right now, in this very moment, matter more than you could ever imagine. The warm September sun caressed my skin as I knelt in my garden, the rich scent of soil and blooming flowers filling the air. It was just another ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day where the most exciting thing on my agenda was deciding which plants needed watering. I remember smiling to myself, thinking about how simple life could be sometimes. The gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant chirping of birds created a peaceful symphony around me. As I reached for my trowel, a sudden, sharp pain erupted behind my eyes. It was as if someone had driven a white-hot needle straight through my skull. I gasped, my hand flying to my forehead as I tried to make sense of what was happening. The pain intensified, spreading like wildfire through my head. My vision began to blur, the vibrant colors of my garden fading into a hazy mess. I tried to stand, but my legs felt weak and unsteady. The world around me started to spin, and I could feel my heart racing in my chest. Panic set in as I realized something was terribly wrong. I opened my mouth to call for help, but no sound came out. The pain in my head was now unbearable, unlike anything I had ever experienced before. My surroundings began to fade in and out of focus. One moment, I could see the worried face of my neighbor peering over the fence, her mouth moving but her words lost to me. The next, everything was a swirl of colors and shapes. I felt myself sway, my body no longer under my control. The ground seemed to rise up to meet me, and I felt the impact as I collapsed onto the soft grass. As my consciousness began to slip away, a strange sense of calm washed over me. The pain receded, replaced by a numbness that spread through my body. I could feel my breathing becoming shallow, each breath a struggle. My eyelids grew heavy, and I found myself unable to keep them open. In those final moments of awareness, a fleeting thought crossed my mind. I wondered if this was what dying felt like, but before I could dwell on that terrifying possibility, darkness enveloped me completely. As I slipped into unconsciousness, I had no idea that I was about to embark on a journey beyond imagination, one that would forever change my understanding of life, death, and everything in between. Little did I know, as I lay there in my garden, that my ordinary day had become extraordinary in the most profound way possible. The line between this world and the next had blurred, and I was about to cross a threshold that few ever return from. In those 9 minutes that followed, while my physical body lay lifeless, my spirit would venture into realms beyond human comprehension, forever altering the course of my life and the lives of those I would touch with my story. The world around me dissolved, replaced by an otherworldly expanse of light and shadow. One moment I was lying in my garden, pain searing through my skull. The next, I found myself suspended in a realm beyond anything I could have imagined. Confusion washed over me as I tried to make sense of my surroundings. Where was I? What had happened to my body? I looked down, expecting to see my hands, my feet, but there was nothing. No physical form, just a consciousness floating in this strange, ethereal space. Panic gripped me as the realization set in. I was no longer in my physical body. Was this death? Had I crossed over to the other side? As my initial shock subsided, I became aware of 2 distinct paths stretching out before me. To my right, a path radiated warmth and beauty, bathed in a soft, golden light that seemed to call to my very soul. It promised peace, joy, and a sense of belonging I had never known in life. The air shimmered with an indescribable energy, filled with whispers of love and acceptance. To my left, another path extended into a vast emptiness. Dark and foreboding, it exuded a sense of loneliness and despair that made my non-existent heart ache. Shadows danced at the edges of my vision, and an oppressive silence hung in the air, broken only by distant, mournful echoes. I stood frozen at this cosmic crossroads, a whirlwind of emotions coursing through me. Part of me yearned to rush towards the path of light, to embrace the warmth and beauty it promised. But another part hesitated, held back by fear of the unknown and a lingering attachment to the life I had left behind. Memories of my family, my friends, and all the unfinished business of my earthly existence tugged at me. Would choosing one path mean leaving everything behind forever? The weight of this decision pressed down on me, more intense than any I had faced in life. As I grappled with my conflicting emotions, I became aware of other sensations. A feeling of timelessness enveloped me, as if past, present, and future had collapsed into a single moment. Colors I had never seen before danced at the edges of my perception, and I felt a deep connection to everything around me, as if I were part of a vast cosmic web. These experiences, I would later learn, were common among those who had near-death experiences. The feeling of leaving one's body, encountering a light, and facing a choice between different paths, all were reported by others who had briefly crossed the threshold between life and death. But in that moment, I knew none of this. I only knew that I stood on the brink of eternity, faced with a choice that would define my existence beyond the boundaries of mortal life. My mind raced, trying to weigh the consequences of each path. Would choosing the light mean leaving behind those I loved? Would the dark path lead to redemption or eternal regret? As I stood there, paralyzed by indecision, I sensed a change in the air around me. A new presence made itself known, powerful and overwhelming. It approached from beyond the two paths, a figure of pure, radiant light that outshone even the golden warmth of the heavenly path. My entire being trembled with a mix of awe and fear. Who or what was this entity that commanded such power? As I stood frozen between two destinies, the figure of pure light approached, and I knew with absolute certainty that this moment would change everything. The figure of light approached, its radiance so intense that I felt I should shield my eyes, yet I couldn't look away. As it drew nearer, the light began to take shape, revealing features that were both familiar and otherworldly. His presence radiated an authority beyond anything I'd ever known, yet his eyes held infinite compassion. My mind reeled as I recognized the figure before me. It was Jesus, but not as I had ever imagined him. His appearance seemed to shift and change, at once both solidly present and ethereally transcendent. One moment, I saw a man with kind eyes and a gentle smile, his hands bearing the marks of crucifixion. The next, he was a being of pure light and energy, his form barely containable in my perception. Overwhelmed by a tidal wave of emotions, I fell to my knees. Awe, fear, love, and reverence coursed through me, leaving me trembling and breathless. Tears streamed down my face as I struggled to comprehend the reality of this encounter. Was this real? Could I truly be standing in the presence of the divine? A small voice in the back of my mind whispered that this must be a hallucination, a product of my oxygen-deprived brain as it shut down. But the intensity of the experience, the visceral sensations and emotions it evoked, felt more real than anything I had ever known in life. As I knelt there, my entire belief system began to crumble and reform. I had always considered myself a Christian, but my faith had been more of a comfortable habit than a living, breathing part of my existence. Now, faced with the undeniable presence of Jesus, I realized how limited my understanding had been. The boundaries between different faiths, the debates over doctrine and dogma, all seemed trivial in the face of this overwhelming reality. Jesus took a step closer, and I felt a warmth wash over me, calming my racing thoughts. His presence seemed to resonate with something deep within me, as if awakening a part of my soul I hadn't known existed. I remembered reading about studies on religious experiences and their impact on the brain, how they could activate areas associated with intense emotion and altered states of consciousness. But this felt beyond any scientific explanation. As Jesus opened his mouth to speak, I held my breath, every fiber of my being straining to hear his words. Would he reveal the mysteries of the universe? Would he judge me for my shortcomings in life? The anticipation was almost unbearable. Then, with a voice that seemed to resonate through my very soul, Jesus said, "Grace." Just my name, spoken with such love and understanding that it brought fresh tears to my eyes. In that moment, any lingering doubts about the reality of this encounter vanished. This was no hallucination or dream. I was truly in the presence of the divine, and he knew me. I looked up into his eyes, seeing in them a depth of wisdom and compassion that defied description. There was sorrow there, too, and a sense of urgency that made my heart quicken. As I opened my mouth to speak, to ask the 1,000 questions that burned within me, Jesus gently raised his hand. With a voice that held the weight of eternity, he said, "Grace, I need you to understand." In an instant, the world around us changed. A place so beautiful and peaceful appeared that I couldn't find the words to describe it. The air glowed with a soft, golden light that seemed to come from everywhere, making everything feel warm and cozy. As Jesus showed me heaven, I felt overwhelmed by all the new sensations. The air was filled with love and acceptance like I'd never felt before. It was as if every part of me was vibrating with the energy of this heavenly place. My mind struggled to take it all in. I saw colors I'd never seen before and heard the most beautiful music that seemed to speak right to my heart. As my eyes got used to the bright light, I started to notice the people in heaven. They moved so gracefully, looking completely happy and at peace. Their faces glowed with joy from being close to God. I was amazed to see them talking without words, sharing thoughts and feelings perfectly. These heavenly beings were doing all sorts of things, but nothing looked like work as we know it. Some were in groups, learning and sharing experiences. Others were making incredible art and music that seemed inspired by God himself. What really stood out was how everyone belonged together. There were no divisions or barriers. Everyone was unique, but they were all connected in a way that's hard to explain. Jesus watched me with a gentle smile as I took all this in. I could tell he was happy to see my amazement and patient as I tried to understand everything. The more I looked around, the more familiar it felt, like I was remembering a place I'd always known, but somehow forgotten. I wondered what else I might see in heaven. Would I meet family members who had died? Would I learn the answers to life's big questions? The possibilities seemed endless, and I felt excited to explore more. As I enjoyed the warmth of heaven, Jesus touched my shoulder. I looked at him, expecting to see joy in his eyes. Instead, he looked serious, and his face seemed to darken. I realized then that my journey wasn't over, and there were still important things I needed to learn. The light faded, replaced by darkness. Jesus turned to me, his eyes sad. "Grace," he said softly, "what you're about to see will be hard, but you need to understand." A heavy feeling surrounded us. Heaven's warmth vanished, replaced by a deep cold. I tried to back away, but couldn't move. The difference between heaven and hell was stark. This place felt hopeless. The air was thick and quiet, except for distant cries that made me shiver. As I got used to the dark, I saw shapes. Souls wandered around, looking pained and regretful. They seemed lifeless, like all their hope was gone. I watched one soul try to touch another, but their hand went right through. God's absence was clear everywhere. While heaven had purpose, hell seemed stuck in time. I cried, seeing their endless regret. I wanted to help, but couldn't. One woman about my age caught my eye. Her sadness was overwhelming. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. I turned to Jesus, confused. "Why?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Why do they have to suffer like this?" Jesus looked at me with sadness and care. "I don't want this for anyone," he said quietly. "But this is what happens when people choose to stay away from God." Hell was worse than I'd ever imagined. It wasn't fire and brimstone, but emptiness and regret forever. I thought about how hell is shown in different cultures and religions. Some things matched what I saw, but nothing captured how truly awful it was, the deep feeling of loss everywhere. Standing there in hell's darkness, I felt urgent. Why was Jesus showing me this? What was I supposed to do? I was eager to hear his explanation, and I felt sorry for the souls stuck here. Crying, I looked at Jesus again, wanting to know why I had to see all this. What I'd seen felt so heavy, and I knew whatever came next would change everything. Jesus' eyes met mine, filled with a mix of sorrow and urgency I'll never forget. The weight of what I had witnessed in heaven and hell pressed heavily upon me, and I knew that whatever came next would change everything. "Grace," Jesus began, his voice gentle yet firm. "What you have seen is the reality that awaits every soul. The choices made in life have eternal consequences." His words sent a shiver down my spine, and I felt the enormity of this knowledge settling over me like a heavy cloak. I struggled to find my voice, my mind racing with questions. "But why show me?" I finally managed to ask, my words barely above a whisper. "What am I supposed to do with this?" Jesus' gaze softened, and I saw a flicker of compassion in his eyes. "You have been given a glimpse of eternity, Grace. With this knowledge comes great responsibility." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "I have shown you these realms so that you can warn others about the consequences of their choices." The concept of free will took on a new, profound meaning in light of what I had seen. Every decision, every action in life suddenly seemed monumental. I thought about the souls I had witnessed in hell, trapped in their isolation and regret. Had they truly understood the weight of their choices while they were alive? But how can people be held responsible for their choices if they don't fully understand the consequences? I asked, voicing the doubt that had begun to creep into my mind. Jesus smiled sadly. "Free will is both a gift and a burden, Grace. Every soul has the capacity to choose love, compassion, and connection with the divine. But they also have the freedom to reject it. Your mission, Grace, is to share what you have learned," Jesus continued, "to help others understand that their everyday choices have eternal significance. It won't be easy. Many will doubt you, and some will outright reject your message." The enormity of this task threatened to overwhelm me. How could I possibly convey the indescribable beauty of heaven or the heartbreaking desolation of hell? How could I make people understand the weight of their choices when I was still grappling with it myself? As if sensing my hesitation, Jesus placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Remember, you are not alone in this. I will be with you, guiding your words and actions." I took a deep breath, feeling a strange mix of fear and determination settling over me. This wasn't a responsibility I had ever sought or imagined for myself, but I knew I couldn't turn away from it. The faces of those lost souls in hell flashed through my mind, and I felt a renewed sense of purpose. "I'll do it," I said, my voice stronger now. "I'll share what I've seen, what I've learned. If it can help even one soul make better choices, it will be worth it." Jesus smiled, and I felt a warmth spreading through me, chasing away my doubts and fears. "You have a challenging journey ahead, Grace," he said. "But remember, every soul you touch with this message is a soul given the chance to choose eternal joy over endless sorrow." As I nodded, accepting this divine task, the world around us began to shift. The boundaries between the celestial and the earthly began to blur, and I felt a pulling sensation, as if I were being drawn back to my physical form. I knew my time in this realm was coming to an end, but the weight of my newfound purpose remained firmly anchored within me. A rush of sensation overwhelmed me as I felt myself being pulled back towards my body. The ethereal realm of light and shadow faded, replaced by physical sensations. My limbs felt heavy, and a dull ache spread through my chest. Part of me wanted to stay with Jesus, to bask in the divine love I'd experienced. Heaven's warmth and peace called to me, but a sense of purpose tugged at my mind, reminding me of the mission I'd been given. As I reconnected with my body, a flood of sensations hit me. My lungs burned as they struggled to breathe, and my heart fluttered erratically. The process of coming back to life after being clinically dead is complex, with oxygen flowing back and cells waking up. I felt pressure on my chest and heard distant voices. A sharp jolt went through my body, making my muscles twitch. The voices got louder and more excited. My eyes struggled to open. Bright light seeped in, painfully intense. Blurry shapes moved above me, slowly coming into focus. I saw medical staff around me, looking relieved but worried. A doctor leaned over me. "Mrs. Carter, can you hear me?" she asked gently. I tried to speak, but only managed a weak groan. Someone put an oxygen mask on me, the cool air soothing my lungs. Memories of my encounter with Jesus swirled in my mind. I wanted to tell them what I'd seen, to share the message I'd been given, but I couldn't get the words out. As I became more aware, I realized my journey was just beginning. The world around me seemed dull compared to what I'd witnessed. I knew I had to share my experience, but it wouldn't be easy. How could I explain it? Would anyone believe me? I felt scared, but determined. I'd been given a second chance for a reason, and I was going to make it count, no matter how hard it might be. The hospital room buzzed with activity, but I couldn't shake the weight of what I'd experienced. Nurses moved around me, checking monitors and adjusting IVs, their voices blending into background noise. The stark walls and antiseptic smell felt unreal after what I'd seen. My body ached, but it was nothing compared to the storm in my mind. I felt caught between two worlds, the hospital routine and the spiritual truth I'd witnessed. When I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of heavenly light or heard cries from hell. It was hard to focus on normal things when I'd seen so much. Mark, my husband, sat by my bed holding my hand. I could see how worried he was. "I thought I'd lost you," he said one night, his voice shaking. I squeezed his hand, wanting to comfort him, but also feeling a new distance between us. How could I explain what I'd seen? As I got better physically, the emotional impact of my near-death experience hit me hard. I felt deeply changed, struggling to make sense of everyday life after glimpsing eternity. While nurses chatted about TV and weekend plans, I was thinking about the afterlife. When it was time to leave the hospital, I felt nervous and excited. I knew I'd have to face a world that might not believe me. People might think I was crazy or making it up. But underneath all that worry, I felt determined. I remembered what Jesus told me, that he trusted me to share my story. Thinking about the souls I saw in hell made me want to speak up, even though it scared me. The morning I left, while Mark helped me pack, I decided I'd tell my story no matter what. It was too important to keep quiet, even if people didn't believe me. As they wheeled me out of the hospital into the sunlight, I knew everything had changed. My hometown looked the same but felt different. I was scared but also felt a sense of purpose. I realized my real journey, one that would test everything I believed in, was just starting. The words caught in my throat as I sat across from Sarah, my best friend of 20 years. Her face, usually so open and understanding, now looked worried and confused. I'd gone over this talk in my head so many times, but now that I was here, I struggled to explain the incredible experience that had changed everything for me. "Grace," Sarah said softly, touching my hand, "you can tell me anything. What's going on?" I took a deep breath. "Sarah, something amazing happened when I was in the hospital." My voice shook a little as I started to tell her about my journey beyond death, the heavenly places I'd seen, and meeting Jesus face to face. As I talked, I watched Sarah's face change. She looked shocked, then amazed, then skeptical. Her eyes got big when I described how beautiful heaven was and how loved I felt there. But when I talked about hell, I saw fear flash across her face. "Grace," she cut in, sounding unsure. "Are you sure this wasn't just a dream? Or maybe something from the medicine they gave you?" I felt frustrated, even though I got why she doubted me. How could I make her understand how real it all was? I remembered Jesus telling me how important it was to share this message, no matter how hard it might be. "I know it sounds crazy," I said, feeling more sure of myself. "But Sarah, it was more real than anything I've ever felt. I was given this knowledge for a reason, and I have to tell people about it." As I kept talking, all the emotions came flooding back. I started crying when I told her about the souls in hell and how much they were suffering. The huge responsibility I felt made it hard to breathe. Sarah just listened quietly. When I finished, neither of us said anything for a while. What I'd told her was so big, it challenged everything we thought we knew about life. "I don't know what to say, Grace," Sarah finally whispered. "This is a lot to take in." Over the next few weeks, I told my family and close friends about what happened. My sister Emily was really interested and asked lots of questions, but my brother-in-law Tom thought I should see a therapist. Having to keep reliving it all and dealing with people not believing me was really hard. Sometimes I wondered if I was going crazy, if maybe the doctors were right about hallucinations. But then I'd close my eyes and remember how it felt to be with Jesus, and I knew it was all real. Slowly, I found some people who supported me. Sarah said she'd try to keep an open mind. Emily became my biggest cheerleader. Even Mark, who wasn't sure at first, started to see how I'd changed for the better. With their help, I felt more confident. I started thinking about how to share my story with more people. I was excited but nervous too. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to face whatever came my way to do what Jesus had asked me to do. As I knelt to pray, the familiar words felt different. Talking to God wasn't routine anymore. It was deep and real, filled with memories of my journey beyond death. My hands shook a little as I clasped them, my heart pounding with awe. My faith had changed, slowly but surely. The Jesus I met was both familiar and new, more real than I'd ever imagined. Heaven and hell weren't just Sunday school lessons anymore. They were vivid experiences that stuck with me day and night. When I closed my eyes, I could almost feel heaven's warmth and hear its music. But I also remembered the souls in hell, their pain a stark reminder of how much our choices matter. My old beliefs seemed shallow now compared to what I'd seen of God's love and justice. Reading the Bible, I found new meaning in familiar verses. Jesus' words about eternity hit home in a way that excited and scared me. My comfortable faith was gone, replaced by an urgent living connection to God. Looking at the cross on my wall, I felt excited but overwhelmed. How could I share what I'd learned? I knew my experience would give weight to my words, but it was a big responsibility. I wondered how to explain these truths to people who might not believe me. It seemed impossible, but I felt at peace knowing I wasn't alone. As I stood up, I felt stronger. My faith wasn't just a habit anymore. It was alive in everything I did. Each day, I felt more in tune with God's plan for me. Getting ready to face the world, I said a quick thank you to God. Even with all my doubts and struggles, I felt closer to Him than ever. This new faith gave me strength for what lay ahead. I knew that everything I said and did would carry the truth I'd seen beyond death. The bright studio lights bore down on me as I sat across from the interviewer, his skeptical gaze piercing through my composure. The makeup artist had tried to hide the dark circles under my eyes, signs of sleepless nights spent thinking about my experiences and the criticism I was facing. "Mrs. Carter," the interviewer began sharply, "how can you prove any of this actually happened? Isn't it more likely that your oxygen-starved brain just made it all up?" I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the tough questions ahead. My story had attracted a lot of attention, and I was facing more and more critics. Scientists, religious leaders, and TV personalities all wanted to pick apart my experience. "I get why you're skeptical," I said, sounding calmer than I felt. "I know my story sounds unbelievable, but what I experienced was more real than anything I've ever known. It wasn't a dream or a hallucination. It was a peek into something beyond our world." The interviewer leaned in, raising an eyebrow. But what about all the research on near-death experiences? Scientists think they're just caused by what happens in the brain when it's under stress. I nodded. I've read those studies, I replied, and I respect the scientists trying to figure this out. But their explanations don't explain why people from different cultures have such similar experiences, or why these experiences change people's lives so much. As I talked, I could feel the pressure of public opinion. People online were arguing about my story, some calling me a prophet, others saying I was a liar or crazy. "Mrs. Carter," the interviewer pushed, "what do you say to people who think you're just doing this for attention or money?" That hurt, and I had to blink back tears. "I didn't want any of this," I said, my voice shaky. "I was happy with my life before, but what I saw, it's too important to keep to myself. I have to share it, even if it's hard for me." Throughout the interview, I tried to balance being sure about what I'd experienced while admitting there was still a lot I didn't understand. I couldn't prove it scientifically, but I could talk about how it had changed my life and others who'd heard my story. "I don't have all the answers," I said as we wrapped up. "There's still so much we don't know about what happens after we die. But I know what I saw and felt. And if telling my story helps even one person live a better life, then all this criticism is worth it." Leaving the studio, I felt tired but determined. The criticism wasn't going to stop, but I was sure about what I'd seen. I knew there would be more challenges, but I was ready for them. I had a truth that had changed my life, and that gave me strength. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the quiet neighborhood as I stood on my porch, taking in the world with new eyes. My journey beyond death had changed me deeply, leaving me with truths I couldn't ignore. The weight of what I now understood felt immense, but it came with an overwhelming sense of purpose. I had to share one last message with anyone willing to listen. My heart raced as I thought about the lives I could touch. I could feel the potential for change in the air, almost as if it were whispering to me. I wanted people to know the power of kindness, the beauty of understanding, and the importance of living with intention. But I also knew something crucial. People had to want to change for themselves. I couldn't force it. The sun dipped below the horizon, and night crept in. I closed my eyes and drew a deep breath, letting the stillness settle inside me. Calm washed over me, and I made a silent promise. I would be an example. I would reflect the love and kindness I had seen in the afterlife. No matter how hard it might be, I would live honestly and with purpose. As I turned to go inside, a quiet determination stirred within me. Tomorrow, I would reach out to the local community centers. I'd share my story, not for recognition, but to offer hope and help. I stepped into my house and closed the door behind me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt at peace. I couldn't change the entire world, but I could make a difference in my corner of it. That was enough.